You're listening to the sea at Moneglia, Italy. The water is my recording, made here in one continuous take. Tonight is Seneca's life in exile on Corsica. You don't have to do anything. I'll do the sitting. The Mediterranean can keep moving. Come along, drifters. Tell me where you're drifting off from tonight, or where in the Maritimes we should walk next. I read everyone. And if you'd like to find your way back here, follow the show. Think of it as leaving a lamp lit in the window for yourself. That's the whole favor. Now no more asks. The rest of this hour belongs entirely to you. By my bed, a nose strip, dark glasses that smooth the late-night screens, magnesium with the last glass of water. The kit is written under this episode. Not promises, just what I use. Hands loose, legs finished. The ground holds me by the sea, and the bed holds you. If my voice becomes another sound in the water, that's the idea. Working. Seneca approaches Corsica with a sentence behind him, and 8 unchosen years ahead. He'll want to leave, and he will live there anyway. Everyone in this life has been at rest for nearly 2,000 years. The ship has crossed. The letters are delivered. Nothing can go wrong for any of them anymore. A ship is moving west across the Tyrrhenian water toward Corsica. The exact harbour has gone out of the story, but the island would have announced itself from a distance. Mountain behind mountain, dark rock rising above the line of the sea. Then a coast becoming particular as the ship came near. Seneca stands somewhere aboard it in the year 41, not travelling for business and not choosing the view. He's in his 40s, already known in Rome as a speaker and writer, and the order carrying him is Exile. A coast can be beautiful while it is taking something from you. The eye receives one fact and the life receives another. Corsica grows larger in front of him, because there is nowhere else for the ship to go. The charge was adultery with Julia Livilla, the emperor's niece. Whether the charge was true is still uncertain, and uncertainty is all the space it needs here. The Senate condemned Seneca, and Claudius changed the death sentence into banishment. Roman mercy sometimes arrived with luggage instructions. Seneca kept his life, but he lost Rome, public office, the law courts' familiar rooms, and the ordinary right to decide which shore he would wake upon. Julia Livilla was sent away too, though not to this island. The machinery at court moved on quickly because machinery is considerate that way. It never asks whether the person underneath has finished understanding what happened. By the time Corsica stood ahead of him, Rome was already busy with the next useful accusation. Then the ship reaches land, and the sentence stops being a document. It becomes a place. There is rock under the sandal instead of a floor in Rome. There is salt drying on rope, cargo being lifted, local speech, and the first question of where the exile is to sleep. Seneca has not become a different man during the crossing. He still has the habits of a successful Roman, the judgment of a senator, an ill body that has followed him since youth, and a mind trained to make sentences behave. None of those things tells him where to put his cloak. Exile is often described in large words, because the first hours are embarrassingly small. A bag, a room, a meal, the knowledge that tomorrow will begin here too. Perhaps you know that last part. Not exile necessarily, but the tomorrow that keeps beginning inside a circumstance you have marked as temporary. You will live properly when the move is finished, when the contract ends, when the health returns, when the house sells, the answer comes, the season changes, the money improves, or somebody finally says you may go. Until then, the mind keeps the good furniture covered. It calls the present a waiting room and refuses to settle in. That can feel sensible for a week, a month perhaps. But human beings have a remarkable ability to remain temporary for years. We postpone the living so faithfully that the waiting becomes the largest thing we do. Seneca had been living at full Roman speed before the sentence. He spoke in the Senate, practiced law, wrote, cultivated friendships, and had begun the public rise expected of a gifted man with the right education. Rome knew how to make a person feel central. There was always another room in which your absence would be noticed, and another favor that could not proceed without you. Corsica offered a correction nobody had requested. The Senate continued without him. Clients found other doors. News crossed the sea after decisions were complete. A public man discovered that public life is perfectly capable of replacing the public man. This is useful information, though it rarely arrives in a useful mood. On the island, he still had a name. He simply had fewer people nearby who needed to say it. His mother, Helvia, had left Rome only 3 days before the ruin. She had gone away without warning because there had been no warning to carry. Then the news caught her elsewhere. Accusation, condemnation, son alive, son gone. Seneca knew how she grieved because he knew the life that had already trained her in it. She had buried people she loved, managed family affairs, endured separations, and kept going with more strength than the Roman idea of a quiet mother knew what to do with. Still, this was her son. Strength does not make a person unavailable to sorrow. It only gives sorrow a stronger house to move through. On Corsica, Seneca began composing the oddest sort of family letter. The banished man would console the mother who was mourning him. He did not write it at once. He says he waited until her grief had spent some of its first violence and could bear being touched. That is one of his better human judgments. Advice delivered too early is often only another thing the suffering person has to carry, and philosophers have produced a fair amount of it because paper does not wince. Seneca waited. Then he gathered what he knew of Helvia, what he believed about fortune, and what he wanted her to believe about him. The letter had to cross the water back to Italy. Somebody would fold or roll the pages, protect them from damp, place them with a traveller, and hope that roads and ships did their ordinary work. Before his mother could be comforted, the Mediterranean had to cooperate. The opening is not really about exile. It is about Helvia's pain, and Seneca approaches it with the confidence of a son who knows his mother, and the caution of a writer who knows he is walking into a room already occupied. He reminds her that this grief is real, then begins reducing what she thinks has happened to him. Exile, he says, is a change of place. The mind can carry its character across a sea. Nature is available everywhere, and virtue is not checked at the harbour with the household goods. It is a strong argument, but the tender thing is not the argument. The tender thing is that he spends so much of his own exile trying to make it smaller for her. A man may be the injured party and still worry most about the person reading the news. He then does what Stoics often do when one life has become too narrow. He widens the map. People have always moved, he tells her. Rome itself is full of people born elsewhere. Towns, colonies, islands, and frontiers are crowded with arrivals who now call the place home. Even Corsica, which he describes as rugged and severe, contains more strangers than natives. So perhaps exile is not an unnatural tearing from the proper soil. Perhaps human beings have always carried home in several pieces. This is persuasive until one remembers that most of those strangers were not placed there by sentence. Seneca remembers too. He does not pretend preference has vanished. He is trying to loosen one knot, not convince Helvia that a forced voyage and a holiday are the same afternoon. When he describes Corsica itself, his generosity thins. To Seneca, it is a rock, bare and steep, poor in food, severe in climate, with no great navigable rivers, and none of the marble, silver, or gold that makes Roman attention brighten. The island has survived this review. It had mountains, forests, farms, towns, harbours, springs, and people who were not waiting for a Roman writer to discover their usefulness. But an exile is not a travel editor. He looks at the landscape and sees what has been taken away. That is worth leaving in him. A person can believe that virtue travels, admire the heavens, continue working, and still be cross about the accommodations. Acceptance does not require us to write a brochure for the thing we would gladly change. He says there is no lodging more splendid than a cottage. So, give him the modest room he gives us, without furnishing it beyond the words. A low roof, a place for a lamp, writing material, a cloak folded or hung where the salt air could reach it, books enough for study, or pages remembered when books were scarce. The important object is the work. In Rome, public business had pressed in from every side. On Corsica, he tells Helvia, his mind had leisure to attend to its own affairs. Sometimes he chose lighter studies. At other times he pushed into questions about nature and the universe. The cottage did not make the sentence fair. It did give the day a table, and the table gave the exile somewhere to put his hands. From that table, his attention travelled farther than he could. He considered countries and their positions, the character of the sea between them, and the tides that draw water away and bring it back. He thought about thunder lightning, wind, vapour, snow, and hail, then raised the inquiry towards the stars. This was not an escape in the flimsy sense. Natural philosophy was real work to him, an attempt to understand the order that held both Ireland and Rome. The sea outside the lodging was not merely the thing between Seneca and home. It had currents, causes, seasons, and a place in a world larger than his verdict. A government could limit where his body slept. It could not make the Mediterranean intellectually small. That portion remained available, and he used it. There is a quiet difference between pretending not to be confined and finding what remains spacious inside confinement. Seneca sometimes crossed that line neatly and sometimes stepped on it. He could not walk into the Forum. He could think about the countries around the sea. He could not call upon his mother. He could address her with the full reach of his mind. He could not resume office. He could investigate weather, ethics, language, and grief. These were not replacements for Rome, and treating them as replacements would make them smaller. They were parts of the life still present. The sentence had closed one gate. Seneca stopped spending every hour pushing his shoulder against it, or at least stopped long enough to open a book. Some days, honestly, that is the whole practice. Then the first year passed. No scene marks the anniversary for us, but Seneca would have known it in the weather and in the calendar of ships. A season returned in which he had expected to be home, then another. The first months could still be treated as an interruption, the kind of misfortune that would be corrected as soon as the right person heard the right argument. By the second year, the interruption had acquired furniture. There were pages already written on the island and subjects begun there. People in Rome had lived through birthdays, illnesses, dinners, quarrels, appointments, and small family jokes without him. A temporary life becomes real in that way, not by permission, but by accumulation. One morning, there is simply too much of it behind you to call it a pause. The years did not need to be dramatic in order to be years. Autumn moved down the mountains. Winter weather crossed the water. Spring returned to slopes Seneca had already judged too barren, and the island continued producing enough life to contradict him without taking the trouble personally. A letter arrived late. Another did not arrive. A book was read again because no new copy had come. Ink, oil, food, cloth, and news still had to be obtained. The body became ill and recovered, as his body had done in other places. None of this gives us a heroic middle. It gives us a middle. Most of a life is made there, among repeated weather and objects that need replacing. History prefers the sentence and the recall. The person has to live the Tuesdays between them. Corsica was not empty, and Seneca was not the only outsider upon it. He noticed that strangers had settled even there, which helped his argument about human restlessness. He also complained later that the speech around him was rough and foreign to his Latin ear. That complaint tells us something useful, though perhaps not what he intended. He had been on the island long enough for the sounds of other people's lives to wear upon him. Market talk, work, greetings, bargaining, voices passing the lodging. The people around him were not symbols of his exile. They were at home, or making one, and getting through their own days. Seneca could explain that the wise person's country is the whole world, then become irritated when the whole world declined to speak like Rome. Philosophy is broad. The ear can remain provincial. In the letter to Helvia, he keeps turning her toward the family still within reach. His two brothers are alive, different in temperament but devoted to her. There are grandchildren. A lively boy named Marcus, whose chatter can interrupt grief for a while. A girl named Novatila, recently without her mother and in need of Helvia's affection and guidance. Helvia has a sister who knows grief of her own. Seneca does not tell his mother merely to stop sorrowing. He gives her people to care for. This is where the philosophy touches the floor. Study, yes, but also a child who must be taught. A sister who will sit nearby, sons who can come through the door. He cannot return to the household. He can still point to the work that love has left inside it. Near the end, he tells Helvia how to picture him. Joyful, cheerful, living, he says, in some of his best days, because public pressure has fallen away and the mind is free for study. I believe the work, I believe the hours of inquiry and the genuine relief from Roman business. And I suspect a son writing to his grieving mother may choose the chair with the least broken leg before describing the room. This is not dishonesty. It is care, mixed with pride, mixed with the philosopher's wish to prove that his philosophy can hold weight. Seneca wants Helvia to sleep. He also wants to be the kind of man whose mother can sleep because he is all right. Those motives sit together on the page, and neither cancels the other. The letter crossed the sea, and that fact matters more than deciding whether every brave sentence lasted all afternoon. Seneca finished it. A copy travelled. Helvia could hold words made by her absent son, and the words directed her back toward study, family, and honourable work. The exile had acted outside himself. His composure was no longer only a feeling he hoped to maintain. It had become pages, carried through weather, that might alter what happened in a Roman house. This is the proven part of an ordinary year. Seneca was still banished when the letter arrived. Nothing external had been corrected for him. Yet something crossed from the life he had into the life of someone he loved. The waiting had produced an action. It was not empty. Somewhere in the middle years, Another death in another family gave Seneca a second reason to write. Polybius, a powerful freedman in Claudius's household, had lost a brother. He was a scholar, translator, and keeper of imperial correspondence, close enough to the emperor that a letter addressed to him might be heard beyond him. Seneca began a consolation. Again he wrote from Corsica to someone in grief, but this room was different. Helvia was his mother. Polybius was a bereaved man standing near the door through which a recall might come. It would be tidy to call the whole work sincere, or the whole work strategic. Seneca rarely gives us that convenience. He could care about another man's grief, and know exactly where that man's desk was. At first, the consolation stays close to the brother. Seneca asks Polybius to remember the man pleasantly, to speak of him, and to preserve him in writing rather than make sorrow the only remaining monument. He refuses the harsh claim that wisdom should remove grief altogether. Those who say a wise person would never mourn, he observes, have probably never had to do it. Otherwise, sorrow would have shaken that proud philosophy out of them. This is Seneca at his most companionable. Reason does enough when it trims what is useless in grief. It need not make love dry-eyed. The thought comes from an exile who has been telling his mother not to weep for him. Contradiction, perhaps, or learning. Human beings often become gentler once the lesson has had time to happen to them. Then the letter begins glancing toward the palace. Seneca praises Polybius's work, his learning, his loyalty, and the emperor whose household gives that work importance. The turn is gradual, then unmistakable. Claudius appears as the consolation above all consolations. If the emperor is safe, Polybius has lost nothing essential. This is a bold thing to tell a man whose brother has died, and even a sleeping listener may feel the furniture shift. Seneca is no longer speaking only to grief. He is speaking through Polybius toward the person who can end his exile. Still, he does not become a cartoon at the sight of an open door. The same hand can offer a true thought and reach for the handle. Most hands have managed both before breakfast. The praise of Claudius grows very warm. Seneca prays for the emperor's long life, celebrates his clemency, and places the mild ruler above the violent fortune that has injured Polybius. He reminds the reader that Claudius spared Seneca when the Senate had condemned him. Gratitude is present. So is usefulness. Claudius did save his life, and Claudius can restore the rest of it. The philosopher who had told Helvia that a cottage could be grand enough for virtue now writes rather attentively about the man who controls the better accommodation. We needn't sneer. 8 years is a long time to perform purity for readers not yet born. Seneca wanted to go home, and he used the instrument he had. His instrument was prose. Naturally, he brought all of it. Near the end, the polished surface opens. Seneca asks Polybius to excuse any weakness in the work because his mind is dimmed by the weariness of a long exile. He says his own eyes have been exhausted by private weeping. He complains that the Latin language is hard to keep bright when the speech around him sounds foreign. This is not the cheerful man Helvia was told to picture. Or not only that man. Here is the one counting years. Here is the Roman ear tired of not hearing Rome, the writer worried that isolation has roughened his sentence, and the exile trying to make his grief useful to somebody with access. The letter does not prove that his earlier courage was false. It proves that courage had mornings when it needed mending. So the two letters can stay beside one another without a trial. To his mother, Seneca says, the mind can be at home anywhere. To Polybius, he reveals how badly he wants the address changed. In one, Corsica gives him leisure for study. In the other, long exile has tired the mind and worn the Latin thin. Both travelled from the same island. Both were things Seneca did there. The contradiction is not a crack through which the philosophy escapes. It is the place where the philosophy has to work. Acceptance was never supposed to mean preferring the sentence, admiring every hardship, or losing the wish for home. It meant that while the wish remained, the day still had to be met by the man who woke inside it. And the days kept asking, read this page, answer that grief, think through the weather, remember the child in Rome, find oil for the lamp, wait for a ship, begin another morning without news. None of those acts ended the exile, and that may be why they matter. A life is not made only from the actions that solve its central problem. It is also made from the ones that keep a person honest, useful, curious, and connected while the problem remains. The waiting years are not rehearsal, they are the life. Seneca did not have to stop wanting Rome in order to write a page worth carrying there. He only had to stop asking the page to be a ship. I have a question for you beneath this episode. Do you believe your circumstances improved you or harmed you? Seneca makes the question difficult in the right way. Exile harmed him. It separated him from his mother, family, work, language, reputation, and chosen place. A punishment does not become harmless because the punished person used the hours well. But the same years pressed him into long study, gave him room to write, and made his claims about fortune answer to an actual shore. Did Corsica improve him? Some parts, perhaps. Did it harm him? Certainly. Human experience is rude to questions that offer only two chairs. Seneca sits between them, working at a table he did not choose. The harm deserves its full size. There were family rooms he did not enter for 8 years. His mother aged beyond the water. Children changed in ways a letter could report but not give back. Public decisions closed before his answer arrived. His name remained in Rome, attached to an accusation, while he had no ordinary way to stand in the same room and outlive the whisper. He was not free because he could study weather. He was a banished man who found work inside a narrowed life. Stoicism becomes cheap when it is used to lower the price of what happened. Seneca's discipline does not reduce the sentence. It shows the size of a person who continued to have duties after the world had become unfair. And the shaping deserves its place too. The exile who consoled Helvia had to decide what could travel when he could not. The one who wrote Polybius discovered that philosophy sounds different when it needs a favor. He had time to look at the distance between a noble claim and an ordinary longing, because the distance was the room he lived in. That may not have made him better in every way. Seneca kept his vanity, his sharp judgments, and enough Roman snobbery to complain about an island while living on it. But the writing gained pressure. The man who said character could cross a sea had crossed one against his will. The idea now had salt on it. That usually tells us more than a clean argument. We often want one verdict because it would tell us how to feel about our own difficult years. If the hardship improved us, perhaps we should be grateful. If it harmed us, perhaps we may reject the whole period and wait for the real life to resume. Seneca offers no such clean account. A circumstance can injure you and still become the place where you practice what matters. Growth does not acquit the harm. Harm does not erase the growth. The day itself is less interested in the verdict. It arrives with its small duties, a letter to finish, a person to reassure, a body to feed, a thought worth following past the first easy answer. Seneca kept meeting those duties, not perfectly, but often enough that the pages reached us. If your life feels suspended tonight, you needn't declare the suspension imaginary. Perhaps there is a place you truly need to leave, an answer that must come, or a condition that ought to change. Seneca wanted the sentence lifted. That wish did not make him a poor Stoic. It made him an exile with an accurate understanding of exile. The smaller question is what still crosses the water before the larger answer comes: what work can be completed? Which person can be cared for? What can be learned without pretending the lesson compensates for the cost? These are not substitutes for freedom. They are how a person avoids abandoning the years to the people or conditions that already took enough. By the later years, Corsica contained a body of Seneca's life that could not be packed away as an interruption. He had studied there, argued there, grieved there, written there, and sent his mind repeatedly across the sea. Pages composed on the island had entered Roman rooms without him. His mother had received the steadier version. Polybius had received the tired and hopeful one. Both were Seneca. The island had not become home by decree, but it had become a place where his actions had consequences. A child might be taught because he reminded Helvia of her. A bereaved man might remember his brother with less violence because the consolation survived its turn toward court. Life had been going on, quietly disobeying the label Seneca put on the years. Then the 8th year arrived. By then, a season on Corsica was not new to him. He had seen the coast in several weathers and watched ships come from a world that still used his name. The wish to leave remained, but it no longer stood at the beginning of an empty stretch. 8 years stood behind it. Somewhere among them were the letters we have, studies we can glimpse, and many ordinary days that did not leave enough noise for history. Those days are not missing from his life because they are missing from ours. They carried his body from his 40s toward 50. They put grey where there had been less grey. They used lamps, meals, sandals, words, patience, and probably a fair amount of complaint. A life, not a waiting room. In the year 49, The order finally changed. A recall came from Rome. The palace reasons belong to another part of Seneca's life, and we can leave them there tonight. On Corsica, the important fact is smaller. The permission he had wanted for years became real. There would be a message, preparations, the gathering of pages and clothing, and another ship at the coast. The room that once proved tomorrow would begin on the island now had to be left behind. Seneca could go home, and because he could, those 8 years did not vanish. They came aboard with him in his age, his writing, his habits, his hunger for public life, and the arguments he had tested against wanting what he did not have. Picture the island receding. The mountains return to shape, then color, then a darker line above the water. Seneca is leaving the place he wanted to leave, which is not the same as recovering the man who arrived. He has 8 years more life than that man had. Not 8 years removed from the account, 8 years in it. Let that be the end of the telling. Nothing more is coming from Rome tonight. The letters are written. The order has changed. The ship is underway, and everyone who waited on either shore has been at rest for centuries. You don't have to follow them any farther. The sea knows what to do with a distant line. So give the whole waiting day to the water now. There is no need to inspect it again, or decide whether it improved you. Set the whole of it on the Mediterranean as one broad thing. The answer that did not come, the circumstance that remains, the room you may still need to leave. The current can carry what has not been solved. It can hold a question without answering it or demanding a verdict. It has never required an ending before it begins to move. You are the passenger from here. The water does the work. Feel the day ease away from the face first. The little grip around the eyes can loosen. They have done enough distance for one day. The old watchfulness can go with them. The forehead has finished looking ahead and rehearsing the view from tomorrow. Let the jaw come unhooked. and let the tongue rest low in the mouth. No message needs to be formed. No explanation needs a better sentence. The current has already taken the words beyond the shore. Now the shoulders lowering without being told twice. The water moves beneath them, steady and wide. Let it carry down through the arms, past the elbows, into the wrists and hands. Every finger can be empty. You have held enough for one day. The ship is moving without your hands on the rope. The pages are dry. Nothing needs to be kept above water tonight. Let the current pass beneath the chest and the back, taking the last stiff shape out of both. The bed can receive the whole width of you. The belly softens, the ribs move because they know how. The back spreads a little farther into what is holding it. You do not have to accept tomorrow in advance. Only this support, already here. Only the water moving while you are still. Down through the hips now, and the thighs, and the knees. Let the current go on ahead. The calves can stop carrying you toward the next place. The ankles are loose. The feet have nowhere left to arrive tonight. Every road, harbour, stair and doorway can wait for daylight. The body has reached a place where it will sleep, and for these hours that is enough place. The breath comes to a quiet lip of water. It rises. And it passes over. In and then down into the wider pool. Out, and the surface closes gently behind it. No breath has to go far. No breath has to prove calm. It only joins the one before, and the current takes both into the dark where counting is unnecessary. The water can sort what morning needs without your help. Whatever is truly yours will remain near enough to find in daylight. Whatever belongs to distance, delay, other people, old verdicts or weather can move farther out. You do not need to name either kind. The current knows the difference by weight. Tonight you are carried, not consulted. And the sea keeps working after the voice becomes small. It moves along the Ligurian coast, out across the Mediterranean, around islands and headlands, under ships whose passengers are awake and ships whose passengers have finally slept. It does not hurry any of them. Water can move all night without becoming urgent. Let it keep the watch. You have reached the part where nothing needs changing. The surface goes dark last. Coast and sky and distant island become one soft line, then less than a line. The current remains underneath, carrying what can move and passing around what cannot. Your body is quiet above it. Your day is already downstream. The waiting is no longer a job you are doing. The shore can wait. The water is moving. You are already in the night. The years were lived. The letters crossed. Nothing is suspended now. The shore can wait. The water is moving. You are already in the night. The years were lived. The letters crossed. Nothing is suspended now. Good night, Drifter. Sleep well beside the Mediterranean, with Moneglia behind us and Corsica faint across the water. Nothing needs to change before you rest. The current will keep moving,